Today in the EU, Orbán's relations with Brussels at boiling point. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had a tense exchange at the Strasbourg plenary on 9th of October after Orbán outlined his country's EU Council Presidency initiatives. Orbán stressed the need for stricter migration controls, questioning the EU's approach to Ukraine. Von der Leyen responded with a strong defense of Europe's military and financial support to Kyiv, and the clash highlighted deepening divisions within the EU as Orbán called for Commission neutrality while von der Leyen criticized Hungary's border control policies and its stance on the Ukraine conflict. Hello and welcome. I am Evi Kiorri, and this is Today in the EU. To take a deep dive into this topic, I spoke with László Andor, Secretary General of FEPS and former EU Commissioner for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, and Nicoletta Ionta, our politics reporter. Nicoletta, starting with you, since you're reporting from Strasbourg, where Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán presented the priorities of the Hungarian presidency in a climate that was anything but calm. What happened during these speeches?
Yes, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orbán, revealed basically the country's priorities for the Council Presidency during this plenary week in Strasbourg. He first revealed the Council Presidency priorities during a press conference on Tuesday, as he wanted to bring more attention to, the agenda of the Council Presidency, and he knew that during his address at plenary, probably things will get overshadowed by the debate that followed. And let's say that the entire discussion was quite intense. Orbán was faced with strong criticism from the MEPs as well. We also had one MEP from Italy, Ilaria Salis, who was in prison in Hungary for a year. Mm-hmm. And that basically, once she became MEP, was able to leave the country, and she's now an MEP. So she has immunity, and she also took stage, and she spoke in front of Orbán. But the entire plenary session was quite intense, yes.
And he was very vocal on many matters. As you mentioned, he provoked the reactions of many MEPs in Parliament. What parts of his speech, which topics caused these reactions?
Something that also happened just shortly after a couple of MEPs organized a set of actions, especially some MEPs from the progressive side started chanting Bella Ciao, the song, and which was something that was met by the president of the parliament, Metsola, with a bit of surprise, as she said that this was not the Eurovision or La Casa de Papel as well. Mm-hmm. But in general, I think the aspects that were probably the most controversial ones were when he spoke about migration, as he mentioned a set of solutions that he would like to propose, which was something that he did as well on Tuesday, such as outside hubs, hotspots, to process migrants in order for people to kind of stop people at the border. Mm-hmm. But in general, he was very vocal about strengthening the external borders and trying to kind of create a system in which people should apply first, and then if, approved, they can get into the union in order to kind of create like a
hotspot.
Yes, indeed. We're talking about like hotspots approach, but outside the union.
Higgyék el nekem, hogy külső hotspotok nélkül nem tudjuk megvédeni az európaiakat az illegális migrációtól. Ha egyszer valakit beengedünk, az többet nem fogjuk tudni hazaküldeni.
Without outside hotspots, we cannot protect Europeans from illegal migration. If we allow somebody in, we cannot send them home.
So if people get approved, then they get in. If they don't get in. He also talked about his concerns regarding the state of Schengen, mm-hmm. and the fact that we are now living in a situation that is much different from when Hungary held the presidency last time, mm-hmm. As we're now facing a set of like conflicts, especially the conflict in Ukraine. He mentioned the Middle East. He mentioned some conflicts in Africa as well. So he kind of introduced the priorities of the Council of the Hungarian presidency as in a way framed into these challenges that the EU needs to face. And one of the things he also stressed was this idea that in order to face these challenges, the EU will need to change. And that's what he said on Tuesday. That's what he said as well yesterday at plenary.
And right after his speech, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen responded to Orbán's remarks. What did she have to say?
So Ursula von der Leyen started her speech talking about Ukraine. She was pretty vocal about the fact that there are still some people that blame this war not on the invader, but on the invaded.
There are still some who blame this war not on the invader, but the invaded. So I want to ask them, would they ever blame the Hungarians for the Soviet invasion in 1956? Would they ever blame the Czechs or Slovaks for the Soviet repression of 1968? Would they ever blame the Lithuanians for the Soviet crackdown of 1991?
Which is a comparison that Orbán completely dismissed. And Orbán actually, when he replied, said that that was a complete mistake on von der Leyen's side to make such comparison. But then, of course, Ursula von der Leyen also challenged Orbán and directly confronted him on the topic of migration, as she said that basically Orbán said that criminals are being locked up in Hungary. But von der Leyen stressed that...
You said that Hungary is protecting its border and that criminals are being locked up in Hungary. I just wonder how this statement fits with the fact that last year your authorities released from prison convicted smugglers and traffickers before they did their time. This is not fighting illegal migration in Europe. This is not protecting our union. This is just throwing problems over your neighbor's fence. We all want to better protect our external borders, but we will only be successful if we work together against organized crime and show solidarity among ourselves.
Which was something that as well was projected by Mr. Orbán when he replied to the Commission President. Overall, I think in general, the speech von der Leyen was quite harsh. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to migration, von der Leyen said that what Hungary is doing is not protecting the union. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Orbán was quite critical when he took stage again, saying that the Commission should remain neutral and that the Commission was not serving the treaties, but it should be like an institution that should serve the treaties, be a guardian of the treaties, and should have some sense of neutrality.
So we are indeed at a point where relations between Viktor Orbán and the EU are at a boiling point. Mr. Andor, coming to you, how did we get to this stage, and what impact is this tension having on Hungary's EU presidency?
Normally, a presidency is a good time for a country to improve the image of the country and develop further the relations between the government and the European Union. And in this specific case, I think the opposite seems to be happening. There have always been low expectations about the Hungarian presidency. And there were some voices in the European Parliament last year when MEPs or experts, advisors tried to figure out how to skip the Hungarian presidency. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, that would have been very, very difficult and maybe too excessive. But anyhow, since the 1st of July, we have the presidency. The first episode is this so-called peace mission of Prime Minister Orbán, which was not announced in advance. Nobody had knowledge that this would be happening. Mm-hmm. What this triggered was a kind of boycott. A lot of high-level officials from different countries, but also from the European institutions, now refrain from coming to Budapest. And some meetings have also been cancelled. It was already quite frosty beforehand, and it's not a good atmosphere.
Now, Hungary's growing ties with Russia and China have also raised concerns about the bloc security here in Brussels and the support to Ukraine. How much damage has Orbán's attitude caused, and what is driving this stance despite its political cost?
I think we can say that Orbán has had a kind of special relationship with Moscow and Beijing for about a decade, which means since the last phase of his first cycle as prime minister after he returned in 2010. And this should be looked at in a longer term perspective. But also, of course, people are interested in what might be the short-term significance of this. I think the longer-term perspective is that he wants to ensure that he cannot be cornered by European institutions, European leaders, any significant European player. But if he is challenged in the European Union, he has another leg to rely on, and he developed not only diplomacy, but very serious economic cooperations with Russia as well as China. And I believe that for them, this is indeed a very important component of the strategic autonomy of Hungary, to stand on more legs and, if necessary, also rely on them. But I think there is also a short-term game here, which is the fact that Mr. Orbán is betting almost everything on the return of Donald Trump. Because if Donald Trump returns as a US president, most likely he would be the best friend of the White House in Europe. And that's not an insignificant position, especially because of his attitude on the war in Ukraine. But of course, he can also lose this game because there's no certainty at all that Trump would return. Quite the contrary. I think in recent weeks, we have seen the likelihood of a Democratic president retaining the White House pretty much increasing.
And Orbán's position on migration isn't surprising at all. Just last month, the Hungarian government threatened to send buses of migrants to Belgium, and he repeated this on Tuesday.
We respect the European law, we will respect all the regulations, but if somebody who gets an asylum in Hungary would like to come to Brussels, we are ready to have them.
Why is Hungary taking this direction, and what impact does it have on the already tense relations between Brussels and Budapest?
I think Orbán is undermining European solidarity and cooperation in many ways, not only in migration. I think in this specific field, which is migration and asylum, his behavior is rather opportunistic. Why am I saying this? Because Hungary doesn't really have a material problem, because nobody really wants to immigrate to Hungary. We are not the highest income country. We don't have the strongest welfare state. There aren't that many job opportunities, and very few refugees speak Hungarian. And that means that the question would be just to implement the necessary administrative procedures required by EU law and allow the registered refugees to transit to other countries. But he saw this as an opportunity to play to the more conservative audiences, typically lower skilled, less educated people. And then he really turned the question of immigration into some kind of soap opera on Hungarian television all the time, including the breaks of sports matches, for example. You can see little inserts about what kind of misery immigration is creating in West European countries and who is protecting Hungary from this nightmare. It's Mr. Orbán. So in a way, this is a show. And indeed, this is a new episode of the show, that buses can be sent with refugees to Brussels. And of course, everybody knows that this irritates the West European colleagues. But on Hungarian media, this can be presented as, again, a very strong action to protect the country.
And we've seen the latest interaction between Orbán and President von der Leyen, and there will be more meetings between the two of them now that she remains at the head of the Commission. Do you see the relations between the EU and Hungary improving anytime soon?
In 2019, Ursula von der Leyen was elected with the votes of Mr. Orbán and his party in the European Parliament. And indeed, at least for a while, there was a relatively cordial relationship, not least because of the CDU background of Madame von der Leyen. And in her commission, it was in particular other personalities like Didier Reynders, like Vera Jourova, like Franz Timmermans, Johannes Hahn, who stood up for the European values and the rule of law and the enforcement of the rule of law conditionality, which was introduced with the Next Generation EU. And there were certain moments when Ursula von der Leyen was actually more lenient. She's a type of politician who likes looking for the middle way and find a modus vivendi, also with difficult clients like Mr. Orbán. So I think it's not going to be an easy reception, but also it will be very, very difficult for the new commission when they enter to decide what is the way forward in this relationship, because the rule of law violations are serious. And everybody among serious experts would say that changes introduced in Hungary have been rather cosmetic rather than essential in order to repair the constitutional architecture and restore checks and balances and ensure that there is effective control over the executive. So I don't expect some kind of amelioration in this relationship. This is the sad reality.
Thank you very much. I am Evi Kiorri, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Saenz Tejada, Charles Cohen, and me. Thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.